On the agenda tonight, we're going to be doing a vocal pitch analysis of David Draymond performing The Sound of Silence. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, I've had a lot of requests for this one, so I thought that I would address those requests tonight. And this is one of those songs and live performances that a lot of people were talking about when it came out from his performance on the Conan show, where people thought it was auto-tuned and some people didn't think it was auto-tuned. So what we're going to be having a look at tonight is the vocal pitch monitor, so we can see what's going on. We're going to have a listen to the original record, so not the actual original from Simon and Garfunkel. We're going to be listening to the version that was released by Disturbed, and that's going to be the original version, isolated vocal. We're then going to listen to the isolated vocal from the Conan show, and then we're going to listen to the isolated vocal of a live performance on, I think it was something like Australia's X Factor or one of those singing competitions. I'm not sure which one it was, but that's a definite live, un-auto-tuned version that I have found. I'm also going to include in the description below another totally live performance by David and Miles Kennedy. So it featured Miles, and that's totally live and not auto-tuned. So check out that video as well, because I think that's a great live version so that you can hear the difference between the recorded version and a version featuring Miles Kennedy. But also just the fact that on the live one that he did in Australia, you could tell that he was trying to find his pitch, and it took a little bit of a while for him to get into it. Just for reference, the reason that I can't do the pitch analysis on the version featuring Miles Kennedy is because there's two voices and the software can't distinguish between those two. So we get lots of confusing lines because it doesn't know where to place it. Also, interestingly, when David starts leaning into his rasp, it does fail to register on the pitch monitoring software because there's so much rasp in there isn't enough note for the software to grab onto to tell you what the pitch is. So we're going to start by listening to the isolated vocal from the released single.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
And jumping in already, just to let you guys know that we've now, on the left-hand side, got our notes with the sharps written in there as well, so you guys have a bit of a reference point. And this is David's voice, by the way. It comes in from the right-hand side and scrolls over to the left. So these are the notes that he's hitting. And, I mean, straight off the bat, when we start, if you're used to looking at this kind of stuff, as we have been over the last couple of weeks, you'll see straight away that we're directly on the line, and we're directly on the line, and that's the kind of thing, and directly on the line. So it's this already some warning signs that we've got some kind of pitch correction going on here, some kind of more pitch correction in the studio rather than auto-tune. We will be listening to the auto-tune live that was used on the Conan show, and yes, it was auto-tuned, just for those people that weren't sure whether it was or not, but we'll have a look at that later on. But let's just get into more of this.
Because a vision softly creeping left its scenes while I was sleeping.
Another thing just to mention is that about the way that pitch correction is used in the studio, and pitch correction, by the way, is different to auto-tune. Auto means it's automatic, so you program a computer to do it and then it just does it. Pitch correction is when you can effectively take the voice and imagine that I wanted to, for example, move this part of David's voice up a semitone. I would be able to grab that and just drag it up to the line. And that's the way that pitch correction works. There are different ways of doing it, and you can get different versions of the software that allow you to do that, different apps. But you can also just select and say you want these waveforms here, select that section and then tell the computer by how many cents you want to raise the pitch by or lower the pitch by. And then you can even get a preview where you listen to it and you think, oh yeah, that's good, and then you apply. I don't do this to my music and my voice, but I have been producing, so I know exactly how everything works in the studio. So when we're looking at, again, snapping to the lines here, when pitch correction has been used quite heavy-handedly, they are using it, and this is why it's so easy to spot, they're using it at 440 hertz in terms of the tuning and its equal temperament, so everything is being snapped to lines. And when you listen to great singers that have the freedom to sing without auto-tune and pitch correction, they won't be directly on the lines because music doesn't work like this, being snapped to lines. So that's why it's quite easy to spot, but let's continue.
And the vision.
And there, I mean, we're probably getting a little bit used to it now. Hopefully you guys are as well, getting used to seeing when we're directly on a line. This is just auto-tune that's doing this, or should I say pitch correction. It's probably a combination maybe of the two in the studio, but it's just being snapped to the line. So when he's not applying his vibrato, and he has a regular vibrato in his voice that interestingly isn't very wide, considering his technique sounds almost classical in nature, and he is a classical singer, you know, he's classically trained. So he's got that ability to apply that really nice even vibrato, but he doesn't apply it in a wide sense, so covering a lot of the note. If you remember from the David Bowie video that we did recently, David, his vibrato was going one note sharp and one note flat, so it's really wide. It would have been from here down to here with David Bowie, whereas here you can see that David's vibrato is really subtle and it's quite fast as well. So he's got that more contemporary sound to his vibrato, but with classical sound technique support, breath support, everything that you want to hear in there, range as well. So it's a really interesting mix of techniques. But let's get back into it.
That was planted in my brain still remains.
And you start to see this common trend of just following these lines like it is stuck to the lines or getting drawn towards the lines, which is what pitch correction is doing. It's just getting it closer to each of these lines that's tuned at 440 hertz.
Within the sound of silence, in restless dreams I walked alone.
And again, it's that kind of thing. Whenever there's a note that's being held without vibrato, this is vibrato here. Again, you can see how it's nowhere near as wide as David Bowie's, as I said. But here, as soon as there's a note that's held for any length of time, it's directly on that line with a tiny little bit of a variation there. But just being perfectly on that line, with great singers, it doesn't happen. And this is why it's interesting, because David is a great singer. There's no doubt about it. So it is interesting to see how tuning his voice is so obvious, because he's such a great singer, he wouldn't be doing this live. And we're going to be looking at that in a second. Going back to the actual live performance, here you can see already how these aren't being snapped to any lines here. And let's just have a little listen to, we'll just have a listen to that particular vocal.
My brain still remains within the sound of silence.
And there is a little bit of crowd noise on here because isolating the vocal is very difficult for the software to do that I was using. And immediately when you start looking at waveforms like this, we hit the line there for a split second, but we're not on the lines because, especially at the beginning of this performance, I know that David was just trying to find his pitch, because it's something that I mentioned a few weeks ago in another video, where you might be doing a sound check at a venue, and especially performing on TV is always a bit of an unknown quantity, because you can have the sound check before everyone's in the studio and everything can sound great, and then you get everyone in the studio, and the difference that would have been between when they started to perform and everyone was there and the sound check is the audience clapping and cheering as the song started, because this has got a really low dynamic start to it in terms of the volume. It's very quiet. There's a little bit of piano, so it means that David wouldn't have been able to hear that because of all the cheering, but the song started. So he's trying to have to rely on his own internal pitch to know where to sing, which, unless you've got perfect pitch, is an impossibility to just magically come out with those notes. So this is why he was trying to find his pitch, and you can see here that he is quite consistently flat, but if you imagine all of these lines just raised up a little bit, he's a fantastic singer. So the intervals between his notes are really accurate. They wouldn't be on the line perfectly all the time, but just trying to find his pitch, he's getting pretty close. Let's now take it back to the auto-tune performance, and this was on straight away. You can start looking at these lines. This is from the Conan show. Look at the lines, the way that they're all being snapped here. I mean, even there, just that first note, perfectly on the line.
Of silence, in restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp, I turned my collar to the cold and damp.
The other thing about auto-tune is you can just hear it, or when I say you can just hear it, this is why I'm doing these videos, is that a lot of people can't hear it, but if you've been in production for any length of time, it is so clear that you can just hear there's auto-tune on the voice, and it does spoil any enjoyment you might get from somebody singing because you hear the effect and not the voice. So when addressing comments in the comments section, there was somebody that said, oh, you know, what's the problem? Can't you just listen to it and enjoy it? You know, even if it's auto-tuned or pitch corrected. But I think if you can hear it, you just hear the effect. It's the effect first, and then the voice is behind that. Rather than without that effect, you get to appreciate the voice for all that it is and all of the subtlety that's within that voice that's unedited. So this is the problem with auto-tune, that if you can hear it, it pretty much spoils everything that you love about the great singers who are being auto-tuned but don't need it. I'd much rather hear David sing this without any auto-tune, but let's listen to a little bit more. This is the Conan performance, by the way.
When my eyes were stared by the flash of a neon light,
and there's that classic auto-tune sound of the flash of the neon light. This neon light. It's just getting snapped to the notes rather than having a natural rundown. Let's see if we can compare that to... I'm going to take it back and we'll compare it to the actual live version.
eyes were stared by the flash of a neon light.
There we go. And as I always say, the waveforms don't lie. Look at that same rundown, a little bit flat and flat. Like I said, his intervals are pretty much spot on. So he's coming down, again, not being snapped to the lines. They're not getting attracted to there. That's what auto-tune does. But here, natural voice, flat, I mean, almost between notes here. And then at the end, just flat and slightly getting up closer to the E, I believe that is. And this is just a natural vocal. So let's actually take those two and have a listen to, first of all, the natural, as we've just heard.
Eyes were stared by the flash of a neon light.
And let's take it back and have a listen to the auto-tune.
When my eyes were stared by the flash of a neon light.
It's interesting because you can almost hear the programming and the app working. You can hear it doing what it's doing to get the voice to that place. So it's unfortunately something that does stand out like a sore thumb. So talking about the use of auto-tune in this setting, this was on a live performance that everyone thought was either live or auto-tuned. There's a big debate about it, but we can see the waveforms don't lie, that it was definitely auto-tuned. Anyway, talking about the original release and the fact that that was auto-tuned, it was a lot more subtle. It was more probably pitch correction than auto-tune, than just letting the computer have its way with the voice. So I was starting to think maybe it was an artistic choice, that they wanted that slightly more mechanical sound to the voice to put across a slightly different feeling to the song and the lyrical content. And because it's just a great song just anyway, having a slightly different take on it, that might have been the choice artistically. But then when it was performed on that talent show, it might have been the case that because it was a vocal talent show, that they decided to sing it without the auto-tune, because otherwise they would have been slated for doing it on a talent show that's all about singing. So it is difficult to know whether this was an artistic choice or whether it's something that's been added after the fact, because David doesn't need this on his voice. And just click on that link in the description below to see that performance with Miles Kennedy, because you will hear that he doesn't need auto-tune, he doesn't need pitch correction even in the studio. I'm sure that if you got him to sing this song twice, 3 times, you would have all the takes you would ever need to get a superb vocal that, yeah, it won't be on the lines all the time, but it'll be pretty close, but it will be natural, and it will have all of that subtlety in the voice that you get with performing naturally and not having a program just snapping things to equal temperament. But let's have a little listen further on, and this is the Conan performance.
Split the night and touch the sound of silence, and in the naked light I saw.
And the other thing that you can look out for are these castles. when David goes up in his range, because of the auto-tune, it starts, because it's literally snapping to these lines, we get this kind of castle arrangement, and it looks like it's drawing, because it is drawing the notes to the line. Let's see what that looks like when we compare it with on the actual live performance. Because of that change in the pitch, the software didn't catch it in time. So that's a bit of a shame that we couldn't see the comparison. But we'll take it back to the auto-tune to see if we can spot these castles.
The naked light I saw, 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking. People hearing without...
I mean, look at that castle that we've got. And this is only happening because of the fact that the auto-tune is snapping it to the lines. And, you know, we have a little, what would that be? Probably a little lookout, maybe at the top of the castle here. And it looks like we're about to draw another castle. But let's go back to... Now, this is more like it. I mean, if somebody designed a castle like this, then you'd probably want your money back. So, let's actually take it back and listen to that line sung without auto-tune.
People talking without speaking.
Like that. And we'll have a listen to it with auto-tune.
People talking without speaking.
So it's just so much more of a mechanical sound. Let's look at this next castle.
People hearing without listening. People writing songs. And voices never share.
And here, look, we get a nice start to the castle here. Another little castle in the background. And I'm just going to take it back. We'll have a little listen to that phrase sung naturally as well.
People writing songs.
And let me just point out, this is what I mean about great singers, as David is. He's now got his pitch in the song. And look at the way that he's pretty much dead on and a little bit flat here. He's got a lot of expression in that. And again, technically a little bit flat there. And I'm talking about flat comparing it with auto-tune. Not that you'd notice anything when he's singing this live. And again, pretty much dead on the line, going a little bit flat and a little bit flat. But it's these tiny parts here where a top singer, as I've said in the past, will occasionally be dead on these lines. I mean, that's technically a little bit sharp, but if you don't really study it, you'll see that it's pretty much on the line. So fantastic singers have got that ability, but they, as you can see here, they'll never get every single note on the line because there's too much expression in the voice.
And voices never share. And no one dare.
Yeah, it's just so unnatural that no one dare. It's just so obvious to hear when you've heard it a million times, but it is a shame. But let's listen to a little bit more of the natural voice. I just prefer the natural voice because you're not listening to a computer program doing anything with it.
Disturb the sound of silence. Fool said you do not know.
And there, look, here we started a little bit flat and then we continue to get flatter away from the B3, but you wouldn't notice this and people wouldn't have noticed this in the performance because it's just expression. But let's see what auto-tune did to that particular line. And there you go. There's the difference between the two. So that's the natural just descending a little bit, and there's the auto-tune just snapped it exactly to that line. Let's have a listen to it and just see how silly it sounds.
Silence. Fool said you do not know.
Yeah, and you can definitely hear it working.
Silence like a cancer grows.
Yeah, it just keeps that note unnaturally solid on pitch. I think Joe Public would not be able to tell the difference pitch-wise between the natural voice and the auto-tune. So there's the excuse to say, well, why use it in the first place? If you can't tell the difference, it is people who might actually be looking at the waveforms and they think, oh no, he's not on the lines. We need to change that. Let's move it up. Oh, he's on the lines now, so it means it must be better because we can now see on a graph that it is correct. But that's not how music works. So I'm not sure why it's used all the time. And especially, I'm not sure why it's used on great singers because David doesn't need auto-tune. And when he starts leaning into his rasp, watch the videos if you get a chance, because in his performance, you can see how it sounds like he's belting and really leaning into his chest voice. But watch the way that he delivers that vocal. He doesn't move further away from the microphone when he's singing the quieter sections. So it means that the voice that he's producing, the volume that he's producing, is the same as the quieter sections, which just indicates flawless vocal technique. He's applying this rasp, but with the same amount of air that he would be using for the quieter sections. So he's got top level technique. And just looking at these waveforms, it's not auto-tune, that is obvious, but it's the waveforms of a top level singer because of his intervals, the way that he's got his pitch so solidly, accurate here, slightly flat with vibrato, and again, slightly flat with vibrato, and here, slightly flat with a straight note, because he's not singing in equal temperament, because that's not the way it works. He's got all of that expression there. So these are the waveforms of a top-level vocalist. And look at the difference here. Again, we've got this descending vocal down into the A3, rather than just straight on the A3, and then the E4. It seems like David just descends onto the note from above, which again just speaks of great vocal technique, because most people have to reach to hit above the note that they're trying to hit. most people are actually trying to reach to hit the note full stop. They can't go above the note and just relax into it. But that's what you can see from these waveforms is happening with David. Rather than just auto-tune snapping it directly on the note, he just descends into it and applies that really nice vibrato. Even though it's not very nice to listen to, let's have a listen to those last few notes with auto-tune.
Of silence.
And with that vibrato, he's actually taking it below the note. So auto-tune is giving him a little bit of extra expression there, but hopefully you'll be able to hear the difference between these two. Let's hear the auto-tune again.
Of silence.
And we'll take it back and hear now the natural version. Let me get it to the right point.
Of silence.
Yes, you can definitely hear a little bit sharp here, but then relaxing into the note. It's one of those things that I don't think Joe Public will notice this kind of thing. But so people will say, well, if we can't notice it, what's the problem? Because some people can notice it. And it's amazing how many people do hear the auto-tune rather than the voice. And a lot of you in the comment section have mentioned that you can hear auto-tune before. And I did that experiment with Freddie Mercury's voice a few videos ago. Was that the last? No, 2 videos ago, where I put auto-tune on Freddie Mercury's voice. And I did it as subtly as I could. But so many of you in the comment section, when I gave you that little test to see whether it was the first or the second version of the vocal that had auto-tune, a lot of you spotted it instantly. And I was doing it really subtly. So it goes to show that people are just hearing auto-tune and not appreciating the voice. So that's the problem. The people that can't hear it, obviously, ignorance is bliss. They aren't having it spoiled by auto-tune. But the people that can hear it, it's spoiling the performance of the song, and people won't buy the song because they'll just hear the auto-tune and they'll choose something where they can hear somebody's natural voice and it doesn't have auto-tune on it. So this is the major thing that I want to point out, that recording studios are missing out on a huge audience by using auto-tune because they don't realize how many people can spot it. And I'm pointing out here with waveforms so that we can see it, but a lot of people can hear it. And this by no means is having a dig at David, and none of these videos are having a dig at any of these vocalists. We are purely looking at auto-tune as an effect, effectively, in the studio, and pitch correction. They are so cut and dry that you can spot the effect. And that's what I'm showing you in these videos, that if you did a waveform analysis yourself of an isolated vocal, you hopefully will now be able to see an auto-tuned vocal and you'll be able to spot it yourself compared with a natural vocal that isn't auto-tuned, and you'll be able to see the differences because auto-tune and pitch correction, they are so heavy-handed with pitch correction in the studio, they are still dragging it directly over the lines, which is equal temperament, 440 hertz tuning. It isn't how music works. So you can spot it a mile off. And this kind of thing here, because they're using that same tuning and equal temperament, and that's the way that the software has been designed, it is so easy to spot. And it might become more subtle in the future, but at the moment we're still at a point where you can spot this kind of thing a mile off. And like I say, waveforms don't lie. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section below, whether you agree with auto-tune or not, and what you think about great singers like David still being put through auto-tune and having their voices pitch corrected. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!